The bell above the diner door rang again, sharp and familiar, cutting through the low hum of voices and the clatter of plates. It was early morning, the kind of hour when the sun was awake, but most people were not. She stood behind the counter, tying the strings of her apron for the third time that morning, making sure the knot was tight. It always had to be tight. Loose strings slowed her down. The diner smelled like coffee that had been sitting too long on the warmer, mixed with grease and the faint sweetness of pancakes. The floor was already sticky, even though she had mopped it before opening. Her shoes made soft, tired sounds as she moved from counter to table, carrying mugs, wiping spills, taking orders she could already guess before the words were spoken. Her hands did most of the talking. They moved fast, steady, practiced. They poured coffee without spilling, stacked plates with care, and counted change down to the last coin. The skin on them was rough, dry from soap and hot water. Small scars crossed her fingers, marks from years of rushing, of grabbing hot plates, of catching falling glasses. They were not pretty hands, but they were strong. They knew this place better than anyone else. She had been working here longer than most people remembered. The owner had changed once, the paint on the walls twice, but she stayed, not because she loved it, but because it paid the bills, because it was close enough to walk when her old car finally stopped working, because someone always needed her here. The early customers came in one by one. A man who always sat at the corner booth, reading yesterday's paper. A couple who shared one plate and spoke in whispers. A woman who complained about the coffee every morning, but drank it anyway. They nodded at her. Some smiled. Most didn't really see her. To them, she was part of the diner, like the tables or the menu on the wall. She greeted them all the same. Her voice was calm, polite, worn smooth by years of saying the same lines. "Morning coffee. I'll be right back." The words came easy, even when her body felt heavy. By mid-morning, the rush began. Orders stacked up, plates piled high near the sink. The cook shouted numbers from the back, his voice loud and sharp. She moved faster, weaving between tables, balancing too much on one arm. Her hands never shook. They could not afford to. She had learned long ago how to keep moving even when tired. Tired was not something she could stop for. It was just another feeling to push aside. She had learned that lesson early in life, back when stopping meant falling behind, and falling behind meant losing something important. Now and then, she caught her reflection in the metal surface of the coffee machine. Her face looked older than her years. Lines framed her mouth and eyes, deepened by long days and short nights. Her hair was pulled back tight, just like her apron strings. There was no time to fix it, no reason to let it down. A child at one table dropped a spoon. Without thinking, she bent down and picked it up, handing it back with a small smile. The child stared at her hands, wide-eyed, as if noticing them for the first time. She wiped the spoon clean before placing it back on the table. Cleanliness mattered here. Details mattered. She did not think much about her hands, but they carried her story. They had held babies once, rocked them through restless nights. They had folded clothes late into the evening, counted bills at the kitchen table, pressed flat against her face when the world felt too heavy. They had signed papers she barely understood and let go of things she wished she could keep. The bell rang again. Another customer, another order, another moment gone. A young man sat at the counter and watched her as she worked. He noticed how she never stopped moving, how she seemed to know where everything was without looking. When she handed him his coffee, their hands brushed for a second. He didn't say anything, but he looked down at her fingers, red at the tips, nails cut short. "Busy day," he said. She nodded. "Always is." That was all. She moved on. There were days when she wondered how long she could keep this up. Her back ached by noon, her feet burned by the end of each shift. Still, she showed up every morning before the sun was fully up, because missing a day meant losing money, and losing money meant worry she could not afford. During a quiet moment, she leaned against the counter and stretched her fingers one by one. The joints felt stiff. She flexed them slowly, then got back to work. The dishes were not going to wash themselves. The cook slid a plate toward her. "Table 3, she picked it up, careful not to touch the hot edge. She had learned where to place her fingers, how to move fast without pain. Experience had taught her what school never did. As she walked, she remembered another kitchen from years ago, smaller, quieter, a place where she once dreamed of something more. Those dreams had faded, not all at once, but slowly, like steam rising from a cup of coffee left untouched. A customer waved her over, snapping fingers in the air. She ignored the gesture but answered the call. She always did. She listened to the complaint, apologized even when it wasn't her fault, and fixed the problem. That was part of the job. Swallowing pride came with the apron. By early afternoon, the diner slowed again. Sunlight poured through the front windows, landing on the counter, highlighting every scratch and stain. She wiped it clean, moving in steady circles. Her hands left the surface shining for a moment before new marks appeared. She watched people come and go, carrying lives she would never know. Some left tips, some didn't. She noticed, but she didn't comment. She folded the money neatly, placing it in her pocket. Every dollar had a purpose waiting for it. In the back of her mind, there was always a list: rent, food bills, repairs, things that could not wait. The list kept her moving even when her body begged her to stop. When her shift finally neared its end, she loosened the knot of her apron. Her fingers hesitated for a moment before pulling the strings free. Red lines marked her waist where the fabric had pressed all day. She rubbed the spot absently, then folded the apron with care. Before leaving, she washed her hands one last time. The water ran over them, warm and steady. She scrubbed slowly, watching the soap bubble and slide away. The scars were still there. The strength was still there. She turned off the light behind the counter and stepped outside. The noise of the diner faded behind her as the door closed. Her hands rested at her sides, tired but ready. Tomorrow, they would be back behind the apron strings again, doing the quiet work no one ever wrote about. The next morning came too soon. The alarm rang while the sky was still dark, and she reached out with one hand to shut it off before it could ring again. Her fingers felt stiff, slow to bend. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, letting the quiet settle before the day began. The room was small and plain. A single window let in a thin line of early light. The air smelled faintly of yesterday's coffee. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and sat there, rubbing her hands together to warm them. Another day waited, and she knew better than to rush her body too fast. In the kitchen, she filled the kettle and set it on the stove. As she waited, she opened and closed her hands, feeling the tight pull in her joints. These hands had done this same motion thousands of times. Some days they felt like part of her. Other days they felt like tools she carried around, worn but still working. She poured the hot water into a chipped mug and stood by the window, sipping slowly. Outside, a car passed now and then. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. Life moved on, whether she watched it or not. By the time she reached the diner, the sun was rising. The building looked tired, just like her, but familiar. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and turned on the lights. The quiet inside felt heavy before the noise would come. She tied her apron again, the same tight knot. Her hands knew the motion without thought. As she set up the counter, her mind drifted back to years before, when these hands were softer. Back when she thought hard work always led to something better. Back when she believed waiting was temporary. She remembered a small house, crowded but warm, mornings filled with voices. Her hands making breakfasts that stretched too little food too far, folding clothes while others slept, wiping tears she pretended not to notice. Responsibility had settled into her palms early and never really left. The bell rang, pulling her back. Customers began to arrive. Orders followed. Coffee poured. Plates clinked. The day took shape. A woman sat near the window, tapping her fingers on the table, impatient. She wanted everything fast. When the food took longer than expected, her voice sharpened. She blamed the server, as if delays were personal choices. She listened quietly. She apologized. She fixed what she could. Her hands moved while her heart stayed guarded. This was not the first time, and it would not be the last later. A man left a folded bill on the table, more than usual. No words, just a small nod. That stayed with her longer than the complaint. Small kindnesses often did. During a break that wasn't really a break, she leaned against the counter and stared at her hands. The skin was cracked in places. A thin line crossed one knuckle, still healing. She remembered how it happened, rushing, distracted, trying to do too much at once. That had always been her way, doing too much because stopping felt dangerous, because slowing down meant thinking too much. The cook joked loudly from the back, breaking the quiet. She smiled without looking up. Humor helped the day pass faster, even when it was rough around the edges. As the hours passed, her thoughts wandered again. She remembered a time when someone once held her hands and told her they were capable of more. She had believed it then. Life had other plans. Dreams didn't disappear all at once. They faded with every bill paid, every shift added, every promise postponed. One day she realized she no longer talked about them. She just worked. A family came in around noon. The children laughed loudly, dropping crumbs everywhere. She cleaned without complaint. Watching them stirred something quiet inside her, a mix of warmth and ache. Her hands wiped the table slowly after they left, as if holding on to the sound a moment longer. By mid-afternoon, her legs felt heavy. Her shoulders ached. She stretched her fingers again, rolling her wrists gently. The diner hummed softly now, calmer. A regular customer asked her how she was doing, not the polite kind, but real enough to pause her. She hesitated, then answered with a simple, "Getting through." That seemed enough. When her shift ended, she changed out of her apron and stepped outside. The day felt different than the morning, warmer, louder. She walked home slowly, letting her hands swing at her sides. At home, she washed her hands carefully, as if the day might still be clinging to them. She dried them and sat at the table, sorting through receipts and bills. Numbers stared back at her. She lined them up neatly. Order gave her some peace. That evening, she held an old photograph, faded edges, a younger version of herself smiling, hands resting easily in her lap. She traced the image with her finger, then set it aside. Before bed, she rubbed lotion into her hands, pressing into the sore spots. It was a small comfort, but she took it out as she lay down. She flexed her fingers once more. Tomorrow they would work again. They always did. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet thought formed, one she hadn't allowed in years. Maybe these hands still had more to do than just survive. The week moved forward in small steps. Each day looked almost the same, yet something underneath felt different. She noticed it when she woke up, before her feet touched the floor. Her hands felt heavier than usual, like they were carrying more than cups and plates. She stretched them slowly, listening to the quiet of the room, and wondered why the feeling would not leave. At the diner, the air buzzed louder than usual. A local event had brought more people in, filling every seat. By mid-morning, the bell over the door rang so often it barely had time to rest. She tied her apron tighter and stepped into the rush. Orders came fast. Voices overlapped. The cook shouted times and table numbers. She moved through it all with practiced care, her hands steady even as her thoughts wandered. She felt pulled into directions, one foot in routine, the other somewhere she could not yet name. A spill happened near the counter. A glass tipped and shattered, sending pieces across the floor. Before anyone could react, she was already there. Her hands guided people back, her voice calm. She knelt carefully, picking up sharp pieces one by one, wrapping them in a towel so no one would get hurt. A customer thanked her, relief clear in their voice. She nodded and returned to work, but her heart beat faster than normal. Moments like these reminded her how quickly things could change later. An older man at a corner table struggled to lift his coffee cup. His hand shook. She noticed right away. She always noticed small things. She moved closer, steadying the cup for him, meeting his eyes with patience instead of hurry. "Thank you," he said quietly. She smiled. It was small, but it mattered. As the day went on, her body began to feel the strain. Her back tightened. Her fingers ached when she gripped plates too long. She paused for half a second, pressing her palms together, then kept going. There was no room for stopping. Around midday, the unexpected happened. A sudden noise cut through the diner. A chair scraped hard against the floor. Someone gasped. She turned just in time to see a woman near the window slump forward, her face pale, her hands sliding off the table. For a brief moment, the room froze. Then her body moved before her mind could catch up. She was at the woman's side in seconds, one hand supporting her shoulder, the other clearing the space around her. Her voice stayed calm as she spoke, telling someone to call for help, asking another to bring water. Her hands felt steady, sure of where to be. The woman's breathing was shallow. Her eyes fluttered. She looked scared. "It's okay," she said softly, though her own heart was racing. "You're not alone." She guided the woman down carefully, supporting her head, keeping her safe from the hard floor. The diner buzzed with worry now, but her focus narrowed. Her hands knew what to do. They had held people through fear before. Minutes felt longer than they were. When help finally arrived, the woman was awake, shaken but breathing easier. The workers took over, thanking her as they did. She stepped back, her hands trembling now that the danger had passed. People watched her differently after that. Some whispered, others nodded with quiet respect. Someone patted her arm as they passed. She did not know what to do with the attention. She returned to wiping tables, to pouring coffee, as if nothing had happened, but something had. During a lull, she washed her hands at the sink, staring at them as the water ran. They shook slightly. She pressed them flat against the metal edge until they steadied. These hands had acted without fear, without doubt. They had stepped forward when others froze. The cook came out from the back, his voice softer than usual. "You did good," he said. She shrugged. Anyone would have. But she wasn't sure that was true. When her shift ended, she felt drained in a way that sleep alone would not fix. At home, she sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting in her lap, replaying the moment again and again. The fear, the calm, the way her hands had known what to do. That night, sleep came slow. She dreamed of the diner, of moving through crowded spaces, of reaching out again and again. The next day, word had spread. A few customers mentioned what had happened. One thanked her again. Another said she had a gift. She brushed it off, but the words followed her through the day. She began to notice how often people relied on her without realizing it. A child reaching for balance. A tired customer needing patience. A co-worker asking for help without asking. Her hands were always there. In the afternoon, during a quiet moment, she sat at a booth and let her hands rest on the table. Sunlight fell across them, showing every line and mark. They looked different to her now. Not just tools, not just tired, they were capable. She remembered the words from long ago. Someone telling her she was meant for more. Back then, she had smiled and believed it. Life had pushed her in another direction, but maybe the road had not ended. The thought scared her more than the emergency had. Hope felt risky. Hope asked for change. That evening, instead of going straight home, she walked past the diner and kept going. Just a few blocks, her hands tucked into her jacket pockets, warm against the cool air. She stopped in front of a small building she had passed 100 times without noticing. A place where people went to learn new skills, to help others. She stood there for a long moment, heart pounding, then turned away. Not yet, she told herself. But the seed had been planted. At home, she washed her hands and sat quietly. The room felt different now, like it was holding its breath. Before bed, she flexed her fingers slowly. They still ached. They were still tired. But they felt awake. Tomorrow would come, as it always did. The diner would open. The bell would ring. But inside her, something had shifted. For the first time in years, she wondered what might happen if she listened to what her hands had been trying to tell her all along. The days after that did not bring applause or big changes. They brought routine. The diner opened. The bell rang. Coffee poured. Life kept its steady pace. Yet something inside her refused to settle back into its old place. She noticed it in small ways. The way she stood a little straighter behind the counter. The way she paused to really listen when someone spoke. The way her hands hesitated before tying the apron, as if asking a quiet question. Customers still came and went. Some remembered what had happened. Most did not. A few said kind words. Others complained about food or waited too long for coffee. The world did not change because of one moment. She knew that. Still, she had changed. One afternoon, a woman about her age sat alone at a table near the window. She looked tired, the kind of tired that went deeper than sleep. When she paid, she thanked her for being patient. "You make this place feel calm," the woman said. The words stayed with her long after the table was cleared. She began to notice how often people leaned on her presence. A steady voice, a careful hand, a moment of calm in a loud place. It was something she had always given without thinking. Now she saw it. During slow hours, she let her thoughts wander again. The small building she had stopped in front of returned to her mind. The idea of learning something new felt heavy and exciting at the same time. Fear mixed with curiosity. At home, she searched through old papers in a drawer she rarely opened. Notes forms, things she once meant to fill out. Her hands shook slightly as she touched them. Not from weakness, but from memory. That night, she sat at the table longer than usual, staring at a blank piece of paper. She did not write anything. She did not need to. Sitting there was enough for now. The next morning at work, the cook mentioned he might take a few days off soon. "Place won't fall apart," he said with a laugh. "You keep it together anyway." She smiled, but inside something warmed. Being seen, even in small ways, mattered more than she had admitted. A regular customer asked if she ever took time for herself. The question caught her off guard. She answered with a half smile, "Not much." That answer echoed in her mind all day. During her break, she stepped outside and let the sun hit her face. Her hands rested on the rail by the door. They looked different in the light. Still worn, still marked, but steady. She thought about all the times she had stepped forward without being asked. How natural it felt to help. How calm she became in moments that scared others. Maybe that was not just habit. Maybe it meant something. The thought followed her home. That evening, she walked past the diner again. This time, she slowed near the small building. The door was open. Voices drifted out. Laughter, conversation, learning happening quietly. She stood there longer than before. No one noticed her. No one needed to. Inside, she imagined herself sitting at a table, hands folded, listening, learning, being more than tired. She did not go in. Not yet. But she did not turn away as quickly either. At home, she cooked a simple meal and ate slowly. She washed her dishes and dried her hands carefully. Then she picked up the old photograph again. The younger woman smiled back, hopeful and unaware. "I didn't forget you," she whispered. Surprising herself, sleep came easier that night. Over the next week, she paid attention to her body. She stretched in the mornings. She rested her hands when she could. Small acts of care felt strange, but right. At work, another small moment came. A new server struggled with the pace, dropping orders and apologizing too much. She stepped in quietly, guiding without taking over, showing where to place hands, how to move smoothly. The relief on the younger worker's face was clear. "Thank you," they said. She nodded. Teaching felt good, natural. Later, alone at the sink, she smiled to herself. Recognition did not come with loud praise. It came in nods, in trust, in the way people relaxed when she was near. One afternoon, she finally stepped inside the small building. Her heart beat fast. Her hands felt warm and alive. She asked simple questions. She listened more than she spoke. When she left, she carried a small stack of papers, information, possibility. At home, she placed them neatly on the table. She did not rush to decide anything. She did not need to. The choice existed now, and that alone felt powerful. The diner remained the same. The bell rang. The coffee brewed. She tied her apron again and again. But behind the routine, a quiet strength grew. One evening, as she untied her apron, she noticed how her hands no longer trembled when the knot loosened. They rested calmly at her sides. She stepped outside and breathed deeply. Tomorrow would bring work. It always would. But it might also bring something else. And for the first time, she was ready to notice it. The morning began like so many others. The alarm rang. The sky was pale. She sat up slowly, letting her feet find the floor. Her hands rested on her knees for a moment before moving. They felt familiar, steady, awake. She followed her usual routine. Water on, kettle heating, a quiet sip from her mug while standing near the window. But there was a difference now. The weight she once carried felt lighter, not because life had become easier, but because she was no longer fighting herself. At the diner, the door unlocked with the same soft click. Lights came on. The smell of coffee filled the room. She tied her apron, the strings snug but not too tight. She had learned there was a balance in most things. The bell rang. Customers arrived. The day unfolded. She moved through her shift with calm focus. Her hands worked as they always had. But now she noticed how much trust lived in those movements. A cup placed gently in front of someone half awake. A plate set down just right. A quiet word offered at the right moment. Late in the morning, a woman entered the diner looking unsure. She stood near the door, scanning the room as if deciding whether to stay. She chose a table near the counter. When she ordered, her voice shook just a little. She noticed. She checked on her more than once. Not in a way that felt heavy, but kind. When the woman left, she paused and said, "Thank you for being patient with me today." She smiled. Anytime. Those words felt true. During the slower hours, she wiped the counter and let her thoughts drift. The papers at home waited quietly. The idea of something new no longer felt distant. It felt possible. A regular customer asked how long she had worked there. She told them. The number surprised even her. Years stacked on years, held together by effort and care. "That's a long time," the customer said. She nodded. "It is." But she did not feel regret in the answer. Only honesty. When her shift ended, she untied her apron and folded it neatly. She washed her hands, drying them slowly. For once, she did not rush out the door. Instead, she stood for a moment, looking around the diner. The place had shaped her, taught her patience, strength, how to read people without words, how to stay calm when things fell apart. She stepped outside into the afternoon light. At home, she placed the papers on the table and sat down. Her hands rested on either side of them. She took a deep breath and began to read carefully, one line at a time. The words spoke of training, of helping others, of learning skills she already carried in pieces. It would not be easy. It would take time. But it was real. She thought about the moment when someone had needed help and her body had moved without fear. About the many smaller moments that came before and after. The way her hands always seemed to know what to do. That evening, she filled out the first form slowly. Her handwriting was neat but unsure. She paused often, not from doubt, but from taking the moment seriously. When she finished, she placed the paper back in the stack and sat quietly. A sense of calm settled over her. The next days passed with gentle change. She still worked her shifts, still wiped tables, still poured coffee, but she also studied in the evenings, practiced small skills, listened closely. Her co-workers noticed something different in her. A lightness, a steadiness. "You seem good," one of them said. She smiled. "I feel like I'm moving forward." That was enough explanation. One afternoon, a new customer asked her why she was always so calm. She thought for a moment before answering. "Because I've learned how to listen, to people, to moments." To herself, time moved on. Not quickly, not slowly, just steadily. One day, she stood behind the counter for what felt like an ordinary shift. But halfway through, she realized something important. She was not afraid of change anymore. Her hands rested on the counter, warm from work, steady and sure. They had carried her through years of quiet struggle. They had held pain and patience, fear and care. They were still behind the apron strings, but they were no longer trapped there. As the bell rang and another customer walked in, she greeted them with the same calm voice she always used, the same practiced motion, the same care. Only now, she knew her story did not end here. It was still being written, and her hands were ready.